The poisoned dart was already flying toward the king's throat when Gloria's body slammed into his armored chest. His crown hit the stone floor with a metallic clang that echoed through the frozen silence of the great hall. 300 nobles stared. The dart embedded itself in the empty chair with a soft, sickening thunk. Frank Campbell, the Iron Wolf, the most ruthless alpha in the kingdom, looked up at the trembling kitchen Omega who'd just tackled him. Then his hand found hers. And in the rafters above, the assassin who never missed cursed one word into the darkness. Impossible. Gloria's knees ached from scrubbing floors, but pain was something you learned to ignore when you were an Omega in the castle of the Iron Wolf. That's what they called Frank Campbell. Not to his face, of course. No one dared speak casually to the Alpha King who'd united the fractured territories through blood and brutality. She'd been invisible for 5 years. 5 years of keeping her head down, her voice soft, her scent suppressed. 5 years of watching the world from the corners of kitchens and corridors, never daring to step into the light where predators hunted. Tonight, that invisibility shattered. The great hall of Thornwick Castle blazed with torchlight and the roar of celebration. Frank had captured the northern rebels who'd been raiding supply routes for months, and every noble, warrior, and visiting dignitary in the region had come to witness their defeat. The air was thick with the smell of roasted venison, spilled ale, and something else Gloria couldn't quite name. Something metallic that made her wolf pace restlessly beneath her skin. More wine for the head table, the head cook barked, shoving a tray into Gloria's trembling hands. And don't you dare embarrass us by dropping it. Gloria clutched the wooden tray against her chest. Bread. Cheese. 3 green apples that gleamed in the firelight. A goblet of wine so dark it looked like blood. Her hands shook as she navigated between the long tables where warriors laughed and nobles schemed. She'd never been this close to the king before. Never wanted to be. Frank Campbell sat at the head table like a warlord from ancient legends, his armor catching the light with every movement. He was younger than the stories suggested, perhaps 30, with a warrior's build and eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of every person in the room. His auburn hair was slightly disheveled beneath his silver crown, and there was a roughness to him that no amount of royal finery could disguise. This was a man who'd killed his first challenger at 16, who'd survived 3 assassination attempts before he turned 20, who'd executed his own uncle for treason and never lost a night's sleep over it. Gloria's wolf whimpered as she approached. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to remember her place. But orders were orders, and Omegas who disobeyed didn't last long in any pack, let alone this one. She was 3 steps from the table when Frank's gaze found her. The conversation around him continued, but his attention fixed on Gloria with an intensity that made her breath catch. His eyes were the color of amber, and they seemed to see straight through the careful mask she'd built over 5 years of survival. "You're new to the hall," he said. His voice was a low rumble that cut through the noise around them. It wasn't a question, but Gloria answered anyway. "And no, Your Majesty. I've been in service for 5 years. Just in the kitchens mostly." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. Or curiosity. 5 years, and this is the first time you've served in the Great Hall? "Yes, Your Majesty." "Look at me." The command was gentle, but it was still a command. Gloria forced herself to meet his eyes, and the moment she did, something shifted in the air between them. The noise of the feast seemed to fade. Her wolf, which had been cowering in fear, suddenly went very still. Frank leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. "What's your name?" "Gloria, Your Majesty." "Gloria Strader." "Gloria." He said it slowly, as if testing the weight of it. "That's—" A commotion at the entrance cut him off. A group of visiting dignitaries had arrived late, creating a stir among the nobles. Frank's attention shifted, and Gloria exhaled in relief. She quickly placed the tray before him, her movements efficient and practiced, then stepped back toward the shadows where she belonged. But as she turned, her wolf suddenly howled in alarm. It was pure instinct that made Gloria look up. High in the rafters, barely visible through the smoke and shadows, something moved with deadly grace. For just a fraction of a second, torchlight caught the glint of steel. Time seemed to stop. Gloria's body moved before her mind could process what she was seeing. She lunged forward, both hands slamming into Frank's armored chest with desperate force. The king toppled sideways, his chair scraping against stone, his crown clattering to the floor in a discordant ring of metal. A soft thunk punctuated the chaos. The sound of something embedding itself in the high-backed chair where Frank's neck had been a heartbeat before. Then the world exploded into motion. "Assassin!" someone roared. Warriors leaped to their feet, weapons appearing from nowhere. Frank's personal guard materialized around him like a steel wall. Nobles screamed and scrambled for cover. Archers rushed to the windows, searching the rafters for targets. But Gloria had fallen hard when she shoved the king. Her hip screamed in pain where it had struck the stone floor, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Strong hands gripped her arms, hauling her upright with surprising gentleness. Welcome back to the channel, my dear friends. Before we dive deeper into the story, kindly click subscribe. Like this video and tell me in the comments which country you are watching from. Your support helps me bring you more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's get into the story. Frank. He was crouched beside her, his guards forming a protective barrier around them both. Blood trickled from a cut on his temple where his crown had grazed him, but his eyes were clear and focused entirely on Gloria. "You saved my life," he said, his voice filled with something between wonder and disbelief. I saw something," Gloria whispered. Her whole body was shaking now, adrenaline giving way to the crushing realization of what she'd just done. She'd touched the king. Shoved him. Sent his crown flying across the floor like common trash. "Your instincts are better than my entire security detail." Frank's grip on her arms tightened, not painfully, but anchoring. "What exactly did you see?" "In the rafters. Movement. And then the light caught something metal, and I just knew." Her voice broke. "I didn't think." "I'm sorry, Your Majesty, I didn't mean to." "There!" A guard pointed upward. Gloria followed his gaze and caught a glimpse of a dark figure moving impossibly fast through the shadows. He swung from beam to beam with acrobatic precision, heading toward the northern tower. Arrows flew, but the assassin was already gone, vanishing through a window like smoke. Frank turned to his captain, a grizzled alpha named Garrett. "Find him. I want every guard on the walls. Seal the gates. No one leaves until we search every room, every passage, every shadow in this castle." "Yes, Your Majesty." Garrett's scarred face was grim. "And the girl?" Frank looked at Gloria, and again, that strange intensity filled his eyes. "She stays with me. I have questions, and I suspect whoever tried to kill me tonight won't appreciate her interference." He paused, then added quietly, "She's under my protection now." The words sent a chill through Gloria that had nothing to do with fear. Under the king's protection. Every servant in the castle knew what that meant. It meant she'd just become a piece on a chessboard she didn't understand, playing a game where the stakes were life and death. She'd spent 5 years being invisible, and in one moment of instinct, she'd thrown all that away. As the guards escorted them to the king's private chambers, Gloria caught a glimpse of the dart still embedded in the chair. Even from a distance, she could see the dark stain on its tip. Poison. Whoever had tried to kill Frank tonight hadn't been taking chances. The great hall descended into controlled chaos behind them. Servants were being questioned, nobles demanding explanations, warriors searching every shadow. But Gloria's world had narrowed to the feeling of Frank's hand on her shoulder, guiding her through the corridors with a possessiveness that both terrified and thrilled her traitorous wolf. "Do you have family in the castle?" Frank asked as they climbed a spiral staircase. "No, Your Majesty. My parents died when I was 12. The pack took me in, assigned me to kitchen work." "No siblings?" "No one who'll worry about your sudden absence." "No one, Your Majesty." Frank was silent for a moment, then, "You can stop calling me Your Majesty every sentence, Gloria. Just my lord will do when we're not in formal company." It felt dangerously intimate, that small concession. Gloria nodded, not trusting her voice. They reached the king's chambers, a suite of rooms that occupied the entire top floor of the eastern tower. 2 guards stood at attention outside, their faces carefully neutral even though their king was covered in dust and bleeding from a head wound while a kitchen omega walked at his side. Inside, the chambers were surprisingly sparse. Gloria had expected opulence, but while the furniture was clearly expensive, there was a military efficiency to the space. Maps covered one wall. Weapons hung on another. A large desk was buried under reports and correspondence. Frank dismissed all but 2 guards, who positioned themselves outside the door. Then he turned to Gloria, and for the first time since the attack, his carefully controlled expression cracked slightly. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair near the fireplace. "Before you fall down. You're shaking." Gloria obeyed, sinking into the chair with a grateful sigh. Now that the adrenaline was wearing off, she felt hollowed out, empty. Her hip throbbed where she'd hit the floor, and her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Frank poured something from a crystal decanter and handed her a glass. Drink. It'll help with the shock. The liquid burned going down, but warmth spread through her chest, and the shaking gradually subsided. Frank poured himself a glass and downed it in one swallow, then poured another before settling into the chair across from her. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. "Tell me about your wolf," Frank said finally. The question surprised her. "My lord, your wolf. The instinct that made you look up at exactly the right moment. That's not normal, even for our kind. Most wolves are attuned to physical threats, immediate danger. But you sensed something before it happened. Explain." Gloria hesitated. She'd never talked about her wolf with anyone, let alone the Alpha King. I've always been sensitive to wrongness. Like when something doesn't fit the pattern. Tonight, everyone was celebrating, drinking, relaxed. But there was this tension in the air. Wrong. And then I saw the movement in the rafters, and my wolf just screamed danger. Frank leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You're a sentinel." "I'm sorry, my lord." "A sentinel. It's rare. Maybe 1 in 10,000 wolves have that gift. You can sense threats before they fully manifest. Feel when something's wrong even if you can't articulate why." His expression was thoughtful. "My grandmother was a sentinel. She saved my grandfather's life twice before she died. The gift usually runs in alpha bloodlines, though. I've never heard of an Omega sentinel." Gloria's heart raced. "I'm not special, my lord. You threw yourself in front of a poison dart meant for me." Frank's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. "That's either the bravest thing I've ever seen, or the most foolish. I'm not sure which." "I didn't think," Gloria admitted. "I just moved. And that," Frank said, "is what worries me. Because whoever hired that assassin isn't going to stop at one attempt. And now you've made yourself a target by interfering." The weight of those words settled over Gloria like a shroud. She'd saved the king's life, yes. But she'd also made an enemy of whoever wanted him dead. And people who hired assassins weren't known for their mercy. "What happens now, my lord?" she asked quietly. Frank stood and walked to the window, looking out over the castle grounds where torches bobbed in the darkness as guards searched for the assassin. "Now, Gloria Strader, your life as a kitchen Omega is over. You're under my personal protection, which means you stay close until we find out who's trying to kill me, and whether they'll come after you in retaliation." He turned back to face her, and the firelight caught his features in sharp relief. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you know anyone in the castle who might want me dead? Anyone who's been acting strangely? Any conversations you might have overheard?" Gloria thought carefully. Kitchen work meant you heard things. Servants gossiped. Nobles talked freely around staff they considered beneath notice. But an outright conspiracy to kill the king? "The northern rebels," she said slowly. "Everyone knows you captured their leaders. But there's been talk in the kitchens about sympathizers still hidden in the castle. Someone said..." She hesitated. "Say it." "Someone said the rebels had resources we didn't expect. Money. Connections. That they were planning something big, but no one knew what." Gloria met his eyes. "I didn't think much of it at the time. There's always talk." Frank's jaw tightened. But tonight proves the talk had substance. He moved back to his chair, his movements controlled but radiating tension. The assassin was a professional. The method was poison, which means they wanted it quiet. If you hadn't interfered, I would have died in the middle of my own feast, surrounded by guards, and no one would have known until it was too late. "Will you catch him, my lord?" "Him?" Frank's eyes sharpened. "You saw the assassin clearly enough to know it was male?" Gloria replayed the brief glimpse in her mind. The build, the way he moved. It was a man. Athletic. Maybe mid-30s? Dark clothing, but I couldn't see his face. "That's more than my guards saw." Frank looked at her with renewed interest. "Your sentinel abilities are stronger than you realize." A knock at the door interrupted them. "Enter," Frank called. Captain Garrett stepped inside, his expression grim. "My lord, we've sealed the castle, but there's no sign of the assassin. We found his entry point, a drainage tunnel that leads to the river. We think he escaped that way before we could secure it." Frank cursed under his breath. "Double the guard on the walls. I want sentries on every approach to the castle. And Garrett." He paused. "The assassin may have help inside these walls. Trust no one except your core unit. Is that clear?" "Yes, my lord." Garrett's gaze flickered to Gloria, a question in his eyes. "She's under my personal protection," Frank said. Prepare quarters for her adjacent to mine. I want 2 guards on her door at all times." Garrett's eyebrows rose slightly, but he simply nodded. "As you command, my lord." After the captain left, Frank turned back to Gloria. "You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow, we'll make more permanent arrangements. But I need you to understand something, Gloria. By saving my life, you've set events in motion that can't be undone. There are people in this kingdom who want me dead, and they won't stop until they succeed. You're part of that fight now, whether you want to be or not." Gloria looked at the man before her, the ruthless Alpha King who'd killed without mercy, who'd united the territories through fear and strength. But in this moment, with blood drying on his temple and weariness in his eyes, he looked less like a monster and more like a man carrying an impossible weight. "I understand, my lord," she said softly. But she didn't. Not really. She couldn't have known that the assassin was already miles away, nursing his wounded pride and planning his next move. She couldn't have known that Frank Campbell had just made a decision that would change both their lives forever. And she certainly couldn't have known that the man who'd tried to kill the king was named Stanley Chapman. And that Stanley Chapman never left a job unfinished. The game had only just begun, and Gloria Strader had just become the most important piece on the board. Outside, night deepened over Thornwick Castle. Somewhere in that darkness, a killer plotted revenge. And in the king's chambers, an Omega and an Alpha who should never have crossed paths sat in firelight, bound together by a moment of instinct that neither could take back. Dawn would bring answers. But it would also bring new dangers neither of them could yet imagine. Gloria woke to sunlight streaming through windows 3 times larger than any she'd ever slept near. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The bed beneath her was softer than anything she'd known, the sheets finer than silk. Then memory crashed back, the poisoned dart, Frank's amber eyes, the assassin disappearing into shadows. She sat up quickly, her heart racing. The room was empty except for a simple wooden chair near the door and a wash basin on a corner table. Through the window, she could see the castle grounds below, guards walking patrol routes with military precision. A soft knock made her jump. "Miss Strader? His Majesty requests your presence for breakfast." Gloria recognized the voice, Captain Garrett. She scrambled out of bed, suddenly aware she was still wearing yesterday's servant dress, now dusty and wrinkled. I need a moment. Take your time. I'll wait outside." She washed quickly with the water in the basin, doing her best to make herself presentable. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a face she barely recognized. Pale skin, wide green eyes still shadowed with exhaustion, auburn hair escaping from its braid. She looked like what she was, a kitchen Omega pretending to belong somewhere she didn't. When she opened the door, Garrett stood at attention. Up close, he was even more imposing than she'd realized. Well over 6 feet, with scars crisscrossing his weathered face and the solid build of a warrior who'd survived countless battles. "Miss Strader," he said formally, "if you'll follow me." They walked through corridors Gloria had never seen before. The servants' passages she knew were narrow and dark, designed to keep staff invisible. But these halls were wide and grand, with tapestries hanging on stone walls and morning light pouring through tall windows. Several nobles passed them, their conversations stopping abruptly as they stared at Gloria with unconcealed curiosity. She kept her eyes down, old habits dying hard. "Hold your head up," Garrett said quietly. "You're under the king's protection now. That means you walk like you belong here." Gloria forced herself to lift her chin, even though every instinct screamed at her to shrink back into invisibility. They reached a set of carved wooden doors where 2 guards stood watch. At Garrett's nod, they pulled the doors open. The room beyond was smaller than the great hall, but still impressive. A private dining chamber with a long table that could seat 20. Only one place was set, at the head of the table where Frank sat reading through a stack of papers. He looked up as they entered, and something in his expression softened slightly. "Gloria, good morning." "Garrett, that will be all." "My lord." The captain bowed and left, closing the doors behind him. Frank gestured to the seat beside him. "Sit. I assume you haven't eaten." "No, my lord." Gloria slid into the chair, acutely aware of how close Frank was. In daylight, without the chaos of last night, she could see details she'd missed. The fine lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the old scar along his jaw, the way his hands moved with controlled precision as he set aside his papers. He rang a small bell, and immediately servants appeared with trays of food. Fresh bread still warm from the ovens. Eggs and bacon. Fruits and cheeses. More food than Gloria usually saw in a week. The servants studiously avoided looking at her directly, but she could feel their shock. One of their own, sitting at the king's private table like an equal. "Eat," Frank said, serving himself. "We have much to discuss, and you'll need your strength." Gloria took small portions, her stomach too twisted with anxiety to handle more. Frank ate efficiently, like a soldier, then pushed his plate aside and turned to face her fully. "I've spent the morning reviewing security reports," he said. "The assassin left no trace beyond the dart, which analysis confirms was coated with nightshade extract, deadly within minutes. My guards found nothing in the drainage tunnel except mud. Whoever he is, he's a professional. And me, my lord? Am I still in danger? That depends on who hired him and how much they value silence." Frank's expression was grave. "If they know you got a clear look at the assassin, they might decide you're a loose end that needs cutting. Which is why you're not going back to the kitchens." Gloria's breath caught. "My lord, I don't understand." "Where would I?" "You're going to be my personal attendant," Frank interrupted. "At least publicly. It gives me a legitimate reason to keep you close, under guard, where I can protect you. But there's more to it than that, Gloria. I need to know if your sentinel abilities work consistently, or if last night was a fluke. You want to test me? I want to keep myself alive. And if you can sense danger the way my grandmother could, you might be the best defense I have against another attempt." He leaned forward, his intensity almost overwhelming. "I'm asking you to stay close to me, to use your instincts, to warn me if you feel that wrongness again. Can you do that?" Every rational part of Gloria wanted to refuse. Being close to Frank Campbell meant danger, scrutiny, stepping into a world where she didn't belong. But the look in his eyes wasn't demanding. It was almost pleading. This ruthless king who terrified everyone around him was asking, not commanding. "I'll try, my lord," she said quietly. "But I can't promise my wolf will always warn me in time. I'll take try over nothing." Frank sat back slightly. "Now, we need to discuss the practical arrangements. You'll have proper quarters, a clothing allowance, and you'll accompany me throughout the day, to meetings, meals, training sessions. Some people will assume you're more than an attendant, and I won't correct them. Let them think what they want. The ambiguity might actually help keep you safe." Heat flooded Gloria's cheeks. "My lord, surely there's another way." "There isn't." Frank's voice was firm but not unkind. "I've made enemies, Gloria. Powerful ones. The Northern rebels are just the latest faction that wants me dead, but they won't be the last. My grandfather used to say that the crown weighs heaviest on those who wear it alone. Maybe he was right. There was something in his tone, a loneliness that resonated with Gloria's own. She'd been invisible for 5 years, yes, but Frank had been isolated in a different way. Surrounded by people who feared him, served him, obeyed him, but never truly knew him. "I'll do as you ask, my lord," she said. "But I have one question." "Ask." "Why me? You could have any alpha in the kingdom as your personal guard. Someone trained, skilled, actually capable of protecting you. Why trust a kitchen omega with something this important?" Frank was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes searching her face. "Because you didn't hesitate. Every trained guard in that hall was watching for threats, and not one of them saw what you saw. Training teaches you to look for patterns, but instinct goes deeper. And because..." He paused, as if weighing whether to continue. "Because when you pushed me out of that chair, you weren't thinking about rewards or recognition. You just acted. That kind of purity is rare in my world, Gloria. Everyone wants something from me. But you? You just wanted to stop something wrong from happening." The honesty in his words stole her breath. This close, she could smell him, pine and steel, and something uniquely alpha that made her wolf stir with interest. Dangerous interest. She pushed the feeling down firmly. Frank Campbell might be less monstrous than the stories suggested, but he was still the king, still so far above her that even thinking of him as anything other than her lord was madness. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now, I introduce you to the court. It won't be pleasant. The nobles will have questions, and my enemies will try to use you against me. But you'll never be alone. Either I'll be with you, or guards I trust absolutely." He stood, offering his hand. "Are you ready?" Gloria looked at that outstretched hand, broad and scarred and surprisingly gentle for someone with his reputation. Taking it meant accepting this new life, with all its dangers and uncertainties. But going back to the kitchens after last night was impossible. The other servants would never accept her again, not after she'd touched the king, not after she'd been elevated so far above her station. She placed her hand in his and let him pull her to her feet. "I'm ready, my lord." What she didn't say was that she was terrified. Terrified of the assassin who might come for her. Terrified of the nobles who would tear her apart with words and schemes. But most terrifying of all was the way Frank's hand felt around hers. Warm and solid and right in a way that shouldn't be possible between a king and a servant. They walked together through the castle, and Gloria could feel eyes following them everywhere. Servants whispered. Nobles stared. By afternoon, the entire castle would know that the Iron Wolf had taken a kitchen Omega as his personal attendant, and the speculation would be merciless. Frank seemed unbothered by the attention, but Gloria caught the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. He was always alert, always ready for the next threat. What must it be like, she wondered, to live every moment expecting betrayal? They reached the war room where Frank's inner circle was gathering. Captain Garrett was already there, along with 4 other men Gloria didn't recognize. All alpha males, all radiating power and barely contained violence. They stood as Frank entered, their expressions carefully neutral as they took in Gloria at his side. "Gentlemen," Frank said, his voice taking on the commanding tone of a king addressing his council. "Most of you know what happened last night. For those who don't, someone tried to assassinate me during the feast. They failed because this woman," he gestured to Gloria, "saw the attack coming and intervened. Gloria Strader is now under my personal protection and will be accompanying me as my attendant. You will treat her with the respect due to someone in my service. Any questions?" One man stepped forward, tall and lean with sharp features and cold blue eyes. "My lord, with respect, is it wise to keep a witness so close? If the assassin returns, he'll have to go through me first," Frank interrupted. "And Gloria's instincts may be our best early warning system. She's a sentinel." That caused a ripple of reaction through the room. Clearly, these men understood what that meant better than Gloria did herself. "A sentinel could be invaluable," Garrett said slowly. "But she's untrained, my lord. And an Omega. No offense intended, Miss Strader, but you're not equipped to defend yourself if things turn violent. Which is why she'll have guards," Frank said. "And why I'm keeping her close enough to protect personally if necessary." Now, what have we learned about last night's attack? The meeting shifted to tactical discussions, guard rotations, investigation reports, lists of potential suspects. Gloria tried to follow along, but the military terminology was foreign to her. What she did understand was that Frank was taking this seriously. He questioned everything, demanded details, and showed a strategic mind that explained how he'd united the territories so effectively. But something was bothering Gloria, a nagging sense of wrongness that she couldn't quite articulate. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on what her wolf was telling her. There, in the corner of the room. Not danger exactly, but deception. Someone here wasn't being honest. Her eyes snapped open, and she found herself looking directly at the man with cold blue eyes who'd questioned her presence. He was listening to Frank explain something about perimeter defenses, his expression attentive and professional. But Gloria's wolf was growling, insistent. Wrong. Something about him is wrong. She reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing Frank's sleeve. He glanced at her and she leaned in to whisper, "My lord, may I speak with you privately? It's urgent." Frank's eyes sharpened. He held up a hand, cutting off whoever was speaking. "Gentlemen, take a 10-minute break. Garrett, with me." The men filed out, though the cold-eyed man gave Gloria a searching look as he passed. Once they were alone except for Garrett, Frank turned to her. "What is it?" "I don't know how to explain this," Gloria said hesitantly. "But my wolf is reacting to someone in this room. Not danger exactly, but deception. Someone here isn't being truthful." "Who?" Garrett demanded. "The man with the blue eyes. The one who questioned whether I should be here." Frank and Garrett exchanged a look. "Lord Ashford," Frank said quietly. "He's been my strategic advisor for 3 years." "Garrett, what do you know about his background?" "Came from the Eastern Territories originally," Garrett said slowly. "Recommended by your uncle before the trial. He's been loyal as far as I know, my lord. But I can have him investigated discreetly." "Do it." Frank looked at Gloria. "Can you tell me anything else? What exactly does your wolf sense?" Gloria struggled to put the feeling into words. It's like he's wearing a mask. The face he shows you isn't his real face. I can't explain it better than that, my lord. I just know something about him feels wrong. What would you do if your instincts told you someone close to you couldn't be trusted, but you had no proof? Would you act on intuition alone, or wait for evidence? Frank was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, 3 years ago, my uncle tried to take the throne. He had supporters throughout the court, people I'd trusted, people who'd served my father before me. I executed 23 nobles for treason after that conspiracy was uncovered, but I always suspected there were more who escaped detection. If Lord Ashford was one of them, then the northern rebels might not be your only enemies, Garrett finished grimly. My lord, if Miss Strader's instincts are correct. We can't act without proof, Frank interrupted. But we can watch him carefully. Gloria, I need you to tell me immediately if you sense anything else from Ashford or anyone else in my council. This could be the break we need to find out who's really behind the assassination attempt. Gloria nodded, though the weight of responsibility was crushing. What if she was wrong? What if her wolf was reacting to something innocent, and she caused Frank to suspect a loyal advisor? But when the men filed back into the room and Gloria saw Lord Ashford's cold blue eyes studying her with barely concealed contempt, her wolf growled again. No, she wasn't wrong. Whatever mask this man wore, underneath it was something dangerous. The meeting continued, but Gloria barely heard it. She was too focused on watching Ashford, trying to understand what her instincts were telling her. He was smooth, professional, offering strategic advice that seemed sound. But there was something calculated about every word, every gesture. Like he was playing a part. When the meeting finally ended and the men dispersed, Frank kept Gloria back with a gentle hand on her arm. They waited until they were alone before he spoke. You did well today, he said quietly. I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to trust your instincts even when they don't make rational sense. If my grandmother taught me anything, it's that sentinel abilities are almost never wrong. They just operate on a level most wolves can't consciously understand. And if I'm wrong about Lord Ashford? Gloria asked. If I've just destroyed your relationship with a loyal advisor? Then I'll deal with the consequences. But Gloria, listen to me. Frank's voice was serious, his eyes intense. In the 3 years Ashford has served me, I've never fully trusted him. I couldn't articulate why, but something always felt off. Your wolf just confirmed what mine has been whispering all along. Sometimes we ignore our instincts because we want to believe the best of people. But kings who ignore their instincts don't live long. The vulnerability in his admission surprised Gloria. This wasn't the ruthless iron wolf of legend. This was a man trying to navigate a world where everyone wanted something from him, where trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. I'll do my best, my lord, she promised. I know you will. Frank's expression softened slightly. Come, I'll show you to your new quarters. Tomorrow we'll get you proper clothing and begin training you in court protocols. But tonight, rest. You've earned it. They walked together through corridors that were becoming slightly less foreign to Gloria. Servants still stared, but she was starting to recognize faces. A maid who'd worked alongside her in the kitchens, a footman who'd always been kind. Their expressions ranged from shock to envy to something that might have been concern. Gloria's new quarters were adjacent to Frank's chambers, connected by a private door that he showed her with almost embarrassed hesitance. For emergencies only, he said. If you sense danger, or if someone tries to breach your door, you come straight through here where my guards can protect us both. Understood? Yes, my lord. The rooms were modest by noble standards, but luxurious compared to the servants' quarters Gloria had shared with 3 other women. A real bed with thick blankets. A wardrobe. A writing desk by the window. And privacy. Blessed, unprecedented privacy. I'll send a maid to help you settle in, Frank said from the doorway. And Gloria, thank you. I know you didn't ask for any of this, but I'm grateful you're here. After he left, Gloria sank onto the bed and let herself feel the full weight of everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, she'd been invisible. Nobody. Safe in her obscurity. Now she was at the center of a deadly game she didn't understand, trusted with secrets that could get her killed, and dangerously close to a king who was nothing like she'd expected. A king whose eyes looked at her like she mattered. Like she was more than just a servant. Like she was someone worth protecting. Gloria closed her eyes and tried to quiet her racing heart. She couldn't afford to read too much into Frank's kindness. He was using her sentinel abilities to stay alive, nothing more. The fact that he treated her with respect was just good strategy, keeping his assets loyal and functional. But her wolf disagreed. Her wolf had felt the connection between them, the moment their eyes met last night, had sensed something deeper than strategy or convenience. Dangerous thoughts. Thoughts that could destroy her if she wasn't careful. Outside her window, the sun was setting over Thornwick Castle. Somewhere beyond those walls, an assassin named Stanley Chapman was planning his next move. Somewhere in the castle itself, enemies wore friendly faces and plotted in shadows. And in the center of it all, a kitchen Omega and a ruthless king were bound together by fate, instinct, and a moment of perfect timing that had changed both their lives forever. The game was accelerating, and Gloria Strader had no idea that the next move would bring her face to face with the man who wanted them both dead. 3 days passed in a blur of lessons, protocols, and constant vigilance. Gloria learned to walk beside Frank without flinching when nobles stared. She memorized the names and faces of his inner circle. She practiced holding her composure when Lady Ashford, Lord Ashford's wife, made cutting remarks about kitchen girls playing dress-up. But every night, she lay awake listening for footsteps that shouldn't be there, wondering when the assassin would strike again. It was on the 4th morning that everything changed. Gloria was helping Frank prepare for a council meeting when her wolf suddenly went rigid. The wrongness hit her like a physical blow, sharp and immediate and screaming danger. She dropped the documents she'd been organizing, her hand flying to Frank's arm. "My lord, something's wrong. Right now." Frank didn't question her. He was already moving toward the door when it burst open. Captain Garrett stumbled through, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, his sword drawn. "Breach in the South Tower," he gasped. "Professional team. They're coming for you, my lord. We need to move now." Frank grabbed Gloria's wrist, his grip iron strong. "How many?" "At least 6. They killed 3 guards before we even knew they were inside." Garrett's face was grim. "My lord, this is coordinated. Someone gave them the guard rotation schedules. Someone inside." The sound of running footsteps echoed from the corridor. Too many, too fast. Frank made a split-second decision, pulling Gloria toward a tapestry on the wall. He yanked it aside, revealing a narrow passage Gloria had never noticed. "Secret escape route," he said, pushing her inside. "Goes down to the armory. Garrett, with us. We'll rally the loyal guard from there." They plunged into darkness, Frank keeping Gloria pressed between himself and Garrett as they descended steep stone stairs. Behind them, she could hear shouts and the clash of steel on steel. The attack was happening fast, too fast. How did they get past the outer defenses? Frank demanded. "That's what worries me," Garrett panted. "The only way this works is if someone disabled the alarm bells and fed them false information about your location. My lord, we have a traitor in the inner circle." Lord Ashford, Gloria's wolf, had known, had tried to warn them. But 3 days hadn't been enough time for Garrett's investigation to find proof, and now they were paying the price. They emerged into the armory, a vast underground chamber filled with weapons and armor. But they weren't alone. 5 men in dark clothing stood between them and the exit, weapons drawn. Professional, silent, deadly, and standing behind them, his cold blue eyes glittering with malice, was Lord Ashford. "Your Majesty," Ashford said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "I'm afraid your reign ends today. Nothing personal, just business. The Northern rebels pay very well for royal blood." Frank's expression turned to ice. He drew his sword in one fluid motion, positioning himself in front of Gloria. "You've been working with them from the beginning." "Not quite. I was your uncle's man originally. When that particular conspiracy failed, I simply found new employers." Ashford smiled. "The rebels have resources you never suspected, my lord. Money, weapons, and me, feeding them every detail of your security, your schedule, your vulnerabilities. Last week's assassination attempt was just the opening move. Today we finished this." Gloria's mind raced. 6 trained killers plus Ashford against Frank and a wounded Garrett. The odds were impossible. But her wolf was doing something strange. Not screaming danger anymore, but focusing with laser precision on the shadows behind Ashford's men. Someone else was here. Someone the attackers hadn't noticed yet. "Gloria," Frank said quietly, not taking his eyes off Ashford. When I move, you run. Straight through that door behind you. Don't look back. Find Commander Walsh in the Eastern Barracks and tell him code Blackfire. He'll know what to do. My lord, I can't just. That's an order. Frank's voice was steel. You're the only one who knows for certain that Ashford is the traitor. You have to survive to expose him. Promise me. Before Gloria could respond, Ashford gave a casual signal. His men attacked. Frank moved like lightning, his blade singing as it met the first attacker. Garrett roared and engaged two more despite his injury. Steel rang against steel in the enclosed space, the sound deafening. Gloria stumbled backward, her heart hammering. But she couldn't run. Not when Frank was fighting for his life. Not when her wolf was still insisting something was wrong with the shadows. Then she saw him. A seventh man, dressed in the same dark clothing as the others, but moving differently. Moving toward Frank's exposed back with a blade that gleamed with the same sickly sheen as the poisoned dart from 3 nights ago. Stanley Chapman. It had to be. The assassin had come back to finish what he started. Gloria didn't think. She grabbed the nearest weapon, a short sword hanging on the wall, and threw herself forward with a scream that surprised even her. The sword was heavier than she'd expected, awkward in her untrained hands, but desperation made her fast. Stanley spun at the last second, his eyes widening in recognition. You, he hissed. Then he moved impossibly fast, his poison blade sweeping toward Gloria's throat. She couldn't dodge in time, couldn't even breathe. This was it, the moment her interference finally cost her everything. But Frank was faster. His sword flashed between them, deflecting Stanley's blade with a shower of sparks. Then Frank's fist connected with Stanley's jaw, sending the assassin sprawling backward. Touch her again and you die screaming, Frank snarled, his voice barely recognizable. Stanley recovered with disturbing speed. His professional composure cracked for the first time. Blood trickled from his split lip, but his eyes were calculating. He glanced at Ashford, who was watching from safe distance, then at the chaos around them. 3 of his team were down. Frank had killed 2, Garrett 1. The remaining 2 were engaged with Garrett, but clearly struggling. This was not going according to plan. Retreat, Stanley snapped. Now! He threw something at the ground, a glass sphere that shattered and released thick, choking smoke. Gloria couldn't see anything, could barely breathe. Strong hands grabbed her, Frank, pulling her down and covering her mouth and nose with his sleeve. When the smoke cleared seconds later, Stanley and the surviving attackers were gone. Only Ashford remained, and he was backing toward the exit, his face pale as he realized his perfect plan had just collapsed. You won't make it out of this castle alive, Frank said, advancing on him with murder in his eyes. I'll see you hang for this, Ashford. But first, you're going to tell me everything. Every name. Every connection. Every coin they paid you. Ashford's mask finally shattered completely. Fear replaced arrogance, and he fumbled for a weapon he didn't have. You don't understand. The rebels, they're just the beginning. There are forces at work you can't imagine. I was trying to survive, that's all. They would have killed my family if I refused. Spare me your excuses. Frank's sword point came to rest at Ashford's throat. Garrett, bind him. He'll confess everything before I'm done with him. But as Garrett moved forward with rope, Gloria's wolf suddenly screamed a warning. She looked up, following her instinct, and saw it. A crossbow bolt descending from a ventilation shaft high in the armory wall. Aimed directly at Frank's back. Down, she screamed, throwing herself at Frank for the second time in 4 days. They hit the ground hard, the bolt whistling over them and embedding itself in the wooden door frame. Frank rolled immediately, searching for the new threat, but whoever had fired was already retreating through the ventilation system. Ashford used the distraction to run. He bolted for the exit, moving with panicked speed. Garrett started after him, but Frank called him back. Let him go. We know who he is now. He won't get far. Frank turned to Gloria, his hands gripping her shoulders. Are you hurt? No, my lord. But that bolt was meant for me. Again. Frank's expression was unreadable. You're keeping a dangerous habit of throwing yourself in front of death for me, Gloria. Your habit is needing it, my lord, she replied, surprised at her own boldness. For a moment, Frank just stared at her. Then, impossibly, he smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. Fair point. The moment shattered as guards poured into the armory, responding to the sounds of combat. Commander Walsh was at their head, a massive alpha with a scarred face and the loyal, steady presence of a career soldier. "My lord, what happened?" he demanded, taking in the bodies on the floor. "Assassination attempt. Coordinated attack with inside help." Frank stood, pulling Gloria up with him. "Lord Ashford is a traitor working for the Northern rebels. He's fled, probably trying to escape the castle. Lock down all exits. I want him taken alive for questioning." Walsh's expression turned thunderous. "Ashford. I knew something was off about that snake. Men with me. Code Blackfire Protocol. Full lockdown. Search every room, every passage. Move." The guards dispersed with military efficiency. Within minutes, alarm bells were ringing throughout the castle, and Gloria could hear the sound of gates slamming shut. Frank, Garrett, and Gloria were escorted back to the king's chambers by a full squad of guards. Once inside, Frank finally allowed himself to show the exhaustion Gloria had sensed building in him. He sank into a chair, his sword still in hand, blood speckling his armor. 3 assassination attempts in 4 days, he said quietly. Stanley Chapman must be getting paid a fortune. "You know him, my lord?" Gloria asked. "Know of him. Best blade for hire in the realm. Never fails a contract, or so the stories say. I'm apparently ruining his perfect record." Frank looked at her. "Thanks to you. That's twice now you've saved my life when trained guards failed to see the threat." "Your sentinel is wasted in an attendant's role, my lord," Garrett said. He'd been bandaged by a healer and looked steadier now. "With respect to Miss Strader, she needs combat training. Raw instinct only goes so far if you can't defend yourself." "Agreed," Frank said. "Starting tomorrow, you'll train with Garrett every morning, Gloria. Basic sword work, defensive techniques, how to avoid getting killed when you insist on throwing yourself at assassins." "My lord, I'm just a kitchen omega. I can't. You're not just anything anymore." Frank's voice was firm but not harsh. "You're a sentinel under my personal protection, and that makes you valuable. Which means you need to be able to protect yourself when I'm not there to do it for you." The concern in his tone made Gloria's chest tighten. She wanted to protest, to insist she was still nobody important, but the words died on her lips. Because Frank was looking at her the way he'd looked at her in the armory, like she mattered. Like losing her would actually hurt him. Dangerous territory. She had to be more careful. "I'll train, my lord," she said quietly. "If you believe it necessary." "I do." Frank stood, wincing slightly. Now that the adrenaline was wearing off, Gloria could see the toll the fight had taken. He was bleeding from a cut on his arm, and he moved with the careful precision of someone nursing bruised ribs. "You're injured," she said, stepping closer before she could think better of it. "Let me call a healer. It's nothing serious. I've had worse." But Frank didn't pull away when Gloria's fingers gently probed the cut on his arm. The armor had protected him from the worst of it, but the wound was still bleeding freely. "This needs cleaning and bandaging at minimum, my lord. Please." Something in her tone made Frank relent. He let her guide him to a chair and began removing his armor, while Gloria found the medical supplies the healers kept in his chambers. Her hands shook slightly as she cleaned the wound, acutely aware of how close she was to him. How the scent of pine and steel and alpha was making her wolf restless in a way that had nothing to do with danger. "You're trembling," Frank observed quietly. "Adrenaline, my lord. It's wearing off." "Liar." But his tone was gentle. "You're afraid. Of me, or of what's happening around us." Gloria paused in her work, meeting his eyes. "Both, my lord. If I'm being honest, I'd rather you be honest than comfortable." Frank's hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his arm. "I know I'm not an easy man to be around, Gloria. I've done things I'm not proud of, made choices that haunt me. But I swear to you, I will keep you safe. Whatever it costs." The intensity in his voice made Gloria's breath catch. This wasn't a king making empty promises to a servant. This was a man making a vow he intended to keep. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much what happens to me?" Frank was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with an emotion Gloria couldn't quite name. "Because when you pushed me out of that chair 4 days ago, you saw me. Not the crown, not the reputation, not the Iron Wolf everyone fears. Just me. A man you thought was worth saving. Do you know how rare that is in my world?" Gloria couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She finished bandaging his arm in silence, her heart racing. A knock at the door broke the moment. Commander Walsh entered, his expression grim. My lord, we've searched the castle. Ashford's gone. We found blood in the north passage leading to the old water gate. Looks like he had an escape route prepared. We're pursuing, but he has at least an hour's head start. Frank cursed. He'll run straight to the rebels and tell them everything. Our defense strategies, guard rotations, all of it. Worse than that, my lord. Walsh hesitated. We found documents in his quarters. Correspondence with someone in the capital. The conspiracy goes deeper than we thought. Ashford wasn't just working for the northern rebels. He was coordinating with noble families who want to see you deposed. The weight of those words settled over the room like a shroud. Frank's uncle's conspiracy hadn't ended with executions 3 years ago. It had just gone underground, growing in the shadows while Frank thought he'd rooted it out. Names, Frank said quietly. I need names, Walsh. Working on it, my lord. But some of the correspondence was in code. It'll take time to decrypt. Walsh looked at Gloria, then back to Frank. My lord, if I may speak plainly? Always. You need to get out of this castle. Too many people have access here. Too many ways for enemies to strike. The Northern Keep, your father's old hunting lodge. It's remote, defensible, and only your most trusted men know its location. Take Miss Strader there until we've rooted out this conspiracy completely. Frank shook his head. If I run, it looks like weakness. The nobles who are already plotting will see it as an opportunity to move against me. And if you stay, you'll be dead within a week, Garrett interjected. He'd been silent until now, but his voice carried absolute conviction. My lord, Walsh is right. We can't protect you here. There are too many variables, too many potential traitors. At the Northern Keep, we control who comes and goes. We can rebuild your security from the ground up with only men we trust absolutely. Gloria watched Frank wrestle with the decision. She could see the calculation in his eyes. Political considerations warring with survival instinct. Then his gaze found hers, and something in his expression softened. What does your wolf tell you, Gloria? The question surprised her. He was asking her opinion on strategy, but she closed her eyes and listened to her instincts. The wrongness that had been plaguing her for days was everywhere now, like poison seeping through the castle's stones. Too many threats, too many enemies wearing friendly faces. We need to leave, my lord, she said quietly. There's danger everywhere here. I can feel it. The Northern Keep, it feels clearer in my mind. Safer. Frank nodded slowly. Then we leave at dawn. Walsh, Garrett, prepare a small convoy. Only men whose loyalty is beyond question. We travel light and fast. He looked at Gloria. Pack only what you need. Where we're going, comfort is secondary to survival. After Walsh and Garrett left to make arrangements, Frank and Gloria were alone again. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. I'm sorry, Frank said finally. This isn't the life you signed up for when you pushed me out of that chair. I didn't sign up for anything, my lord. I just acted. Gloria managed a small smile. But I don't regret it. Even with everything that's happened. You should. Any sane person would run from me and this mess as fast as possible. Maybe I'm not sane. The words came out lighter than she intended, and Frank actually laughed, a real, genuine laugh that transformed his whole face. Maybe you're exactly the kind of insane I need right now. He stood, moving closer until they were barely a foot apart. Gloria, I need to know something. Are you sure you want to come with me tomorrow? Because once we leave this castle, there's no going back. You'll be implicated in whatever happens next. If my enemies win, you'll go down with me. Gloria should have been terrified. Should have begged for a chance to disappear back into the kitchens, to fade into obscurity before this deadly game destroyed her completely. But when she looked at Frank, all she saw was a man trying to carry an impossible burden alone. A man who'd shown her more kindness and respect in 4 days than she'd received in 5 years of service. A man whose amber eyes looked at her like she was someone worth keeping alive. I'm sure, my lord, she said firmly. Wherever you go, I go. That's what you need from a sentinel, isn't it? Someone who can sense danger before it strikes. I can't do that if I'm hiding in the kitchens while you face your enemies alone. Frank's hand came up to cup her cheek, the gesture so gentle it made Gloria's heart ache. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the most reckless. I haven't decided which. Can I be both? Gloria whispered. I suppose you'll have to be. Surviving around me requires both courage and a willingness to ignore good sense. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and Gloria's breath hitched. "Thank you, Gloria. For staying. For seeing me. For being exactly what I needed when I didn't even know I needed it." Before Gloria could respond, Frank stepped back, the moment breaking. "Get some rest. Dawn comes early, and the ride north is brutal. We'll need all our strength for what's coming." Gloria nodded and retreated to her chambers, her heart still racing. Once alone, she pressed her hand against her chest, trying to calm its frantic beating. What was she doing? Frank Campbell was a king, an alpha, so far above her station that even thinking of him as anything other than her lord was madness. And yet when he'd touched her face, when he'd looked at her with such raw honesty, she'd wanted nothing more than to close the distance between them and... No, she couldn't think like that. Frank was being kind because she'd saved his life. Because she was useful to him. Reading anything more into his actions would only lead to heartbreak. But as Gloria lay in bed that night, listening to the sounds of the castle preparing for their departure, she couldn't shake the memory of Frank's hand on her face. The warmth in his eyes. The way he'd said her name like it mattered. Tomorrow they would flee into the wilderness, pursued by enemies who wanted them dead. Tomorrow everything would change again. But tonight, for just a few hours, Gloria let herself imagine what it might be like if the impossible were possible. If a kitchen omega and a ruthless king could be something more than circumstances had dictated. In the next room, Frank sat at his desk and stared at the maps spread before him without really seeing them. His mind was on the woman sleeping just beyond the wall, the shy omega who kept throwing herself in front of death to save him, who looked at him with eyes that held no fear, no calculation, just honest concern for his well-being. He was falling for her. It was reckless, dangerous, potentially disastrous for both of them. But Frank Campbell had survived by trusting his instincts, and every instinct he possessed was screaming that Gloria Strader was important. Not just because of her sentinel abilities, not just because she'd saved his life, but because somewhere in the chaos and violence and constant threat of death, she'd become the one thing he'd never expected to find. Hope. Dawn broke cold and gray over Thornwick Castle. Gloria stood in the courtyard watching guards load supplies onto horses, her breath misting in the early morning air. She wore leather riding clothes that Garrett had provided. Practical, sturdy, nothing like the servant's dress she'd worn just days ago. A small pack containing her few possessions was strapped to her back. Everything was moving fast. Too fast. Frank emerged from the keep flanked by Commander Walsh and 6 guards, his most trusted men, chosen for absolute loyalty. He'd traded his ornate armor for simpler gear that wouldn't draw attention, but there was no disguising what he was. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge. His eyes found Gloria immediately, and something in his expression softened. "Ready, as I'll ever be, my lord." They mounted up, Gloria on a gentle mare that Garrett promised wouldn't throw her despite her complete lack of riding experience. Frank rode beside her on a massive warhorse that seemed to match his temperament perfectly. Controlled violence waiting for direction. As they rode through the castle gates, Gloria looked back at the only home she'd known for 5 years. Servants watched from windows. Nobles gathered in clusters, whispering. Everyone knew the king was fleeing, and speculation would be vicious. "Don't look back," Frank said quietly. "It makes leaving harder. Have you done this before, my lord? Run from your own castle." "Once. When I was 16 and my father's enemies came for me. I spent 3 months in the wilderness with only 2 guards and a horse." Frank's expression was distant. "That's when I learned that survival matters more than pride. Living means you can fight another day. Dying for honor just means you're dead." They rode north through dense forest, the horses picking their way along trails that were barely visible. Commander Walsh led the way with 3 guards, while Garrett and 2 more brought up the rear. They moved in silence, every man alert for threats. Gloria's wolf was restless but not alarmed. The wrongness that had plagued her in the castle faded with each mile they traveled. Out here, with only Frank's most trusted men, she could finally breathe. But the peace didn't last. They were 2 hours into the journey when Gloria's wolf suddenly screamed warning. She yanked her horse to a stop, her hand flying up. "Wait, something ahead," blocking the path. Frank immediately signaled the convoy to halt. Walsh and his men fanned out, weapons drawn. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a figure stepped onto the trail ahead. Tall, lean, moving with the casual confidence of a predator who knows he has the advantage. Stanley Chapman. Your Majesty, the assassin called out, his voice carrying easily through the forest. I admire your persistence, I truly do. But this ends today. More figures emerged from the trees. At least a dozen men, all armed, all positioned to cut off any escape route. They'd been waiting. Somehow, Stanley had known exactly which path Frank would take. Ashford told him, Garrett growled. The traitor knew about the northern keep. Stanley smiled, though it didn't reach his cold eyes. Lord Ashford has been very helpful. He's also very afraid of what you'll do to him if you survive, so he's paying me double to ensure you don't. Nothing personal, Your Majesty. Just business. Frank's hand moved to his sword. You could walk away right now, Chapman. Take your money and disappear. I'll even let you live. Tempting. But I have a reputation to maintain. Stanley's gaze shifted to Gloria, and his expression hardened. You, on the other hand, you're the reason I failed twice. I don't appreciate complications, Miss Strader. I'm going to enjoy killing you almost as much as the king. Pure terror flooded Gloria, but she forced herself to stay still. Running would just make her an easier target. You'll have to go through me first, Frank said, his voice deadly calm. And I promise you, Chapman, I won't die easily. I'm counting on it. Stanley raised his hand, and his men moved forward. What happened next was chaos. Steel rang against steel as Frank's guards engaged Stanley's team. Frank himself charged straight for the assassin, his warhorse scattering men like bowling pins. Garrett grabbed Gloria's horse's reins and yanked her toward a gap in the ambush. Ride, he roared. Get her out of here. But Gloria's wolf was screaming something different. Not danger ahead, danger behind. She twisted in her saddle and saw it. 3 of Stanley's men breaking away from the main fight, circling around to cut off their escape. They'd anticipated Frank would try to save Gloria first. Garrett, behind us. The captain spun, saw the threat, and made a split-second decision. He shoved Gloria's horse forward while turning his own mount to face the attackers. Go. Follow the stream east. It'll take you to the valley road. Don't stop for anything. I can't just leave. That's an order from your king. Protect yourself so he doesn't die trying to save you. Now go. Gloria's horse bolted at Garrett's command, crashing through underbrush. Behind her, she could hear fighting, screaming, the horrible sound of steel meeting flesh. Every instinct screamed at her to go back, to help somehow, but she knew Garrett was right. If she stayed, Frank would risk everything to protect her. Her survival meant he could focus on his own. She rode blindly, branches whipping her face, her inexperienced riding making her bounce painfully in the saddle. The sounds of battle faded behind her, replaced by the thundering of hoofbeats and her own ragged breathing. The stream appeared ahead, exactly where Garrett said it would be. Gloria turned to follow it east, her horse splashing through shallow water. They'd ridden maybe 10 minutes when she heard it, more hoofbeats behind her, closing fast. Her wolf told her this wasn't Frank or Garrett. This was prey being hunted. Gloria urged her horse faster, but the mare was already exhausted. Whoever was chasing her was gaining ground. She needed to think, to find an advantage somehow. There, a fallen tree across the stream ahead, creating a natural barrier. Gloria made a desperate choice. She dismounted while the horse was still moving, hitting the ground hard and rolling behind the fallen tree. Her horse kept running, hoofbeats continuing downstream. With any luck, her pursuer would follow the horse and not notice she'd dismounted. Gloria pressed herself against the rotting wood, trying to quiet her breathing. The pursuing hoofbeats reached her position, then stopped. Silence stretched out, broken only by the gurgle of the stream and her hammering heart. "Clever girl," a voice said from above her. Gloria looked up to find Stanley Chapman standing on top of the fallen tree, his blade dripping blood. He must have left the main fight to pursue her personally. The obsession in his eyes was terrifying. This wasn't just about money anymore. She'd wounded his pride, ruined his perfect record. Now it was personal. "Your king is dying back there," Stanley said conversationally. "My men are excellent at their work. Even if he survives the initial assault, the poison on their blades will finish him within the hour." He jumped down, landing gracefully. "So you and I have time for a proper conversation before I kill you." Gloria scrambled backward, her hand finding a rock by the stream bank. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Why do you care so much about killing me? I'm nobody. You were nobody." Stanley advanced slowly, savoring her fear. "But then you interfered. Twice. Made me look incompetent in front of my employers. Do you know how hard it is to rebuild a reputation after failure? I've killed 37 high-profile targets without missing once, and then a kitchen Omega ruins my perfect record. His blade rose. I'm going to make this hurt, Miss Strader. Consider it a lesson about knowing your place. He lunged. Gloria threw the rock with all her strength. It caught Stanley in the throat, making him choke and stumble. She ran, crashing through the forest with no plan except survival. But Stanley recovered fast. Too fast. Within seconds he was on her, his hand tangling in her hair and yanking her backward. Gloria screamed, thrashing, but he was so much stronger. The blade came up, poised to slash across her throat. A massive gray wolf exploded from the underbrush, all fangs and fury. It slammed into Stanley with the force of a battering ram, sending him flying. The assassin hit a tree hard, his blade spinning away into the leaves. Frank. Even in wolf form, Gloria recognized him. The gray fur, the amber eyes, the sheer size that marked him as an alpha. He'd shifted and tracked her scent, abandoning the fight to save her. Stanley struggled to his feet, pulling a knife from his boot. But he was injured now, blood streaming from the wolf's bite, his movements slower. Frank circled him, growling low and dangerous, every line of his body promising death. So the rumors are true, Stanley gasped. The Iron Wolf lives up to his name. He feinted left, then threw the knife right. A perfect shot aimed at the wolf's eye. Frank dodged, but not quite fast enough. The blade scored along his ribs, drawing blood. He yelped but didn't retreat. Instead, he attacked with renewed fury, jaws snapping for Stanley's throat. The fight was brutal and fast. Stanley was skilled, but Frank was alpha strong and fighting to protect his mate. Because that's what Gloria's wolf recognized in his desperation. Not just a king protecting a useful asset. A mate defending what was his. Stanley went down hard. Frank's jaws clamped around his sword arm. Bone crunched. The assassin screamed. In one fluid motion, Frank released the arm and lunged for Stanley's throat, ending it. Silence fell over the forest. Frank stood over Stanley's body, blood dripping from his muzzle, his sides heaving. Then he shifted back to human form, a painful transformation that left him naked and bleeding from multiple wounds. The knife had done more damage than Gloria realized, and there were other injuries from the initial ambush. Frank, Gloria breathed, rushing to him. Oh gods, you're hurt. I'm fine. But he swayed dangerously, and Gloria barely caught him before he fell. The adrenaline was wearing off, and blood loss was taking its toll. We need to stop the bleeding, Gloria said, trying to sound calmer than she felt. Sit down. Let me see how bad it is. Frank obeyed, sinking to the ground. The wound along his ribs was deep, still bleeding freely. Gloria tore strips from her shirt, pressing them against the injury. Her hands shook as she worked, but her wolf was steady, focused on keeping their alpha alive. Their alpha. When had she started thinking of Frank that way? The others, Frank managed. The ambush. I don't know, my lord. Garrett sent me away. Told me to run. Smart man. Frank's hand covered hers where it pressed against his wound. Gloria, listen to me. If I don't make it, don't say that. You're going to be fine. We just need to get you somewhere safe, get you a healer. If I don't make it, Frank continued firmly, you take my signet ring and go to Commander Walsh if he survived, or to Duke Harrison in the capital if he didn't. Tell them everything. About Ashford, the conspiracy, all of it. Promise me. Tears blurred Gloria's vision. I promise. But you're not dying, Frank Campbell. I didn't save your life 3 times just to watch you bleed out in a forest. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. 3 times. That's got to be some kind of record. It's becoming a bad habit for both of us. They sat like that for a moment, Gloria putting pressure on Frank's wound while he leaned against her for support. Despite everything, the danger, the pain, the bodies scattered through the forest behind them, Gloria felt strange peace. Out here, stripped of titles and protocol, they were just 2 people trying to survive. I should have known Stanley would come after you specifically, Frank said quietly. Should have protected you better. You literally turned into a wolf and saved my life, my lord. I think that counts as protection. It wasn't enough. You were terrified. I could smell your fear. His hand tightened on hers. I can't. Gloria, I can't lose you. Do you understand? I've lost so many people. My father. My mother. Guards who died protecting me. I can't add you to that list. The raw emotion in his voice made Gloria's heart clench. You're not going to lose me. We're both going to survive this. Hoofbeats approached, multiple riders moving fast. Gloria tensed, but Frank's expression cleared. That's Garrett. I'd recognize his horse's gait anywhere. The captain emerged from the trees with 4 guards, all that remained of their convoy. All were wounded to varying degrees, but alive. Garrett's eyes widened when he saw Frank's injuries. My lord, you're fine. Mostly. Stanley Chapman is dead. How many did we lose? Commander Walsh and 2 others. The rest of Stanley's team scattered when we killed half their number. Garrett dismounted, already pulling bandages from his pack. We need to get you to the northern keep immediately. Those wounds need proper treatment. They fashioned a rough stretcher using cloaks and branches, then lifted Frank onto his horse with Gloria behind him to keep him stable. He protested, insisted he could ride on his own, but he'd lost too much blood to be trusted alone in the saddle. Gloria wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling every breath he took, every wince of pain he tried to hide. Her wolf was frantic with worry, but she forced herself to stay calm. Frank needed her steady right now, not hysterical. They rode hard for another 3 hours before the northern keep finally appeared through the trees. It was smaller than Thornwick Castle, more fortress than palace, built of dark stone that seemed to grow from the mountainside itself. Remote, defensible, and hopefully safe. The gates opened at Garrett's signal, revealing a garrison of about 40 men, the skeleton crew that maintained the keep year-round. They stared in shock as their bloodied king rode through on horseback, supported by a woman none of them recognized. Get the healer, Garrett barked. Now, and prepare the master chambers. The king is wounded. Within minutes, Frank was being carried to a room in the keep's tower. Gloria tried to follow, but a stern-faced Omega healer blocked her path. He needs rest and treatment. No visitors until I've stabilized him. But I'm his. Gloria stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. His what? Attendant? Sentinel? Something more she didn't dare name? She stays with me. Frank's voice came from inside the room, weak but commanding. That's an order, Healer Morrison. The woman's expression soured, but she stepped aside. Gloria entered to find Frank already on the bed, his torso bare as Morrison began cleaning his wounds. The knife wound looked worse in good light, deep and angry, though fortunately it had missed anything vital. Gloria sat in a chair by the bed, feeling useless. She'd never felt more out of her depth. This morning she'd been preparing to flee a castle. Now she was watching the king she'd somehow become impossibly attached to being stitched back together after nearly dying to save her life. You should rest too, Miss Strader, Morrison said as she worked. You look ready to collapse. I'm fine. You're in shock and running on adrenaline. Once it wears off, you'll crash hard. The healer's expression softened slightly. There's a room adjoining this one. Use it. His Majesty will sleep for several hours once I give him something for the pain. You might as well do the same. Gloria wanted to argue, but exhaustion was finally catching up with her. The events of the past hours were crashing down all at once. The ambush, Stanley's pursuit, watching Frank fight for his life. Her hands started shaking again, harder this time. Gloria. Frank's hand found hers, his grip weak but steady. Do as she says. Please. I'll be right here when you wake up. She nodded, not trusting her voice. After Morrison finished and left them alone, Gloria pulled a chair close to Frank's bedside. She'd rest in the adjoining room soon, but first she needed a few more minutes. Needed to assure herself he was really alive. You saved me again, Frank said quietly. His eyes were already growing heavy from whatever Morrison had given him. That rock throw was impressive aim. Desperation makes for good aim, apparently. Gloria managed a weak smile. Frank, when Stanley said you were dying back there, when I thought, her voice broke. I know. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I felt the same when I saw him about to kill you. Like my whole world was ending. Gloria, I need to tell you something before I lose consciousness from whatever poison Morrison just gave me. My lord, you should rest. I'm falling in love with you. The words came out rushed, slurred slightly from the medicine. I know it's insane. I know it's dangerous. I know I'm your king and you were, a servant, and this could destroy us both. But I can't keep pretending I care about you only because you're useful. That's not why I shifted and tracked you. That's not why I almost died fighting Stanley. I did it because the thought of losing you was unbearable. Gloria couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The ruthless Alpha King, the Iron Wolf who showed no weakness, who'd executed his own uncle without hesitation, had just confessed he was falling in love with her. You don't have to say anything, Frank continued, his words slowing as the medicine pulled him under. I just needed you to know. In case we don't. In case something happens and I never get another chance to. His eyes closed, his breathing evening out as sleep claimed him. But his hand never released hers. Gloria sat frozen, her heart thundering. She should be horrified, should be thinking about all the reasons this was impossible. But all she felt was a fierce joy that terrified her with its intensity. Because somewhere between that first moment in the Great Hall and this one, she'd fallen too. Fallen for the man behind the crown. The one who looked at her like she mattered. Who trusted her instincts. Who'd risked everything to save her life. I love you too, she whispered to his sleeping form. Gods help us both, but I do. Outside the window, the sun was setting over the mountains. In Thornwick Castle, conspirators were plotting. In the capital, nobles were choosing sides. A war was coming, and Gloria Strader, former Kitchen Omega, newly discovered Sentinel, was standing right at its center. But in this moment, sitting beside Frank Campbell's bed and holding his hand while he slept, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. They'd survived the ambush. Survived Stanley Chapman. Survived betrayal and poison and impossible odds. Maybe, just maybe, they could survive what came next. Together. 3 weeks passed at the Northern Keep like a held breath waiting to be released. Frank recovered slowly, his alpha healing working overtime to mend the damage Stanley's blade had inflicted. Gloria rarely left his side during those first days, her sentinel instincts on constant alert for any threat. But the keep remained quiet, a fortress carved into the mountain, known only to Frank's most loyal men. It was Garrett who brought news from the outside world on a cold morning that smelled of coming snow. My lord, we've intercepted correspondence from the capital. He spread letters across the war room table where Frank, Gloria, and his remaining commanders had gathered. The conspiracy runs deeper than we thought. 7 noble houses are involved, including Duke Ravencroft and Lord Minister Brennan. They're claiming you've abandoned your throne, that you fled like a coward. They're calling for a council to elect a new king. Frank's jaw tightened. He was still healing, moving carefully to protect his ribs, but his eyes burned with cold fury. Brennan. I should have known. He was my father's closest advisor, and I always suspected he resented serving the son instead of claiming power himself. There's more, my lord. Garrett hesitated. They've put a bounty on your head. And on Miss Strader's. 50,000 gold for proof of death. They're calling her your witch, claiming she's bewitched you into abandoning your duties. Gloria felt the blood drain from her face. Witch. The oldest accusation in the book when men wanted to destroy a woman who'd gained influence. They want to discredit us both. They want to justify killing us, Frank corrected grimly. If I'm a bewitched king who abandoned his throne, and you're the evil Omega who seduced me into weakness, then murdering us becomes a heroic act. He looked at his commanders. How many loyal houses remain? At least 12 that we know of, another commander, a grizzled alpha named Torres, replied. Duke Harrison sent word he's raising his forces. Lady Ashford has publicly denounced her husband and pledged her family's troops to your cause. And the Eastern Territories remain loyal. They remember what you did to stop the raids. So we have support, but we're outnumbered. Frank studied the maps spread before them. They'll expect me to march on the capital directly, to confront them in a show of strength. What they won't expect is for you to disappear completely, Gloria interrupted quietly. Everyone turned to stare at her. She swallowed hard but continued. I mean, what if you let them think they've won? Let them fight over who gets to be the new king while you rebuild your forces in secret. Then, when they're distracted tearing each other apart, you strike. Frank's expression was unreadable. You're suggesting I play dead. I'm suggesting you play the long game, my lord. The conspirators are united right now because they have a common enemy, you. But the moment you're gone, they'll turn on each other. Duke Ravencroft won't want Minister Brennan on the throne any more than Brennan wants Ravencroft. Let their alliance collapse under its own weight. Garrett was nodding slowly. It's brilliant, actually. Risky as hell, but brilliant. If we spread rumors that you died from your wounds, that Miss Strader fled into exile, the conspirators will relax. Start fighting among themselves for control. And we use that time to contact every loyal house quietly, build a real army, not just the remnants we have now. And when we return, Torres added, his scarred face splitting into a fierce grin, we hit them all at once, before they can unite against us again. Frank was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table. Then his eyes found Gloria's. This was your idea. Are you prepared to see it through? Because playing dead means actually disappearing. No contact with the outside world. No way to know what's happening in the capital. We'd be gambling everything on the hope that our enemies destroy themselves. Gloria thought about the kitchen Omega she'd been just weeks ago. Invisible, afraid, content to hide in shadows. That woman would never have spoken up in a war council. Never have suggested strategy to a king. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She'd saved Frank's life 3 times. Had watched him nearly die to protect her. Had fallen impossibly, irrevocably in love with a man she should never have even spoken to. I'm prepared, my lord, she said firmly. We do whatever it takes to win. The decision was made. Over the next 2 days, they carefully staged Frank's death. Garrett rode to the nearest loyal village and spread word that the king had succumbed to infected wounds, that his body had been burned according to Alpha tradition. He paid messengers to carry the news to the capital, along with rumors that the witch Omega had fled in grief and terror. Meanwhile, Frank and Gloria went deeper into the mountains with only a handful of guards, so remote that not even most of Frank's own men knew where they'd gone. A hunter's cabin that Frank's father had built decades ago, accessible only by a treacherous mountain pass that closed entirely once winter snows arrived. It was the most alone they'd been since the night of the feast. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms and a fireplace, but it was warm and defensible and, most importantly, secret. Their guards set up a perimeter camp a quarter-mile away, close enough to respond to threats, but far enough to give Frank and Gloria privacy. This is where my father used to take me, Frank said as they settled in on their first evening. Before the crown got too heavy, before enemies at every turn. He'd bring me here and we'd just exist. Hunt, fish, talk about things that mattered. I haven't been back since he died. Gloria could hear the pain in his voice. She moved closer, taking his hand. He would be proud of you, Frank. Of the king you've become. Of the man who's fighting so hard to save his kingdom. Would he? Frank's laugh was bitter. I've made so many mistakes, Gloria. Trusted the wrong people. Failed to see conspiracies forming right under my nose. Let enemies get close enough to nearly kill me. What kind of king does that make me? The kind who's still alive because he learned from those mistakes. Gloria turned him to face her. You're not perfect, Frank Campbell. You're ruthless when you need to be, suspicious of everyone, and you carry the weight of your crown like it's crushing you. But you're also brave and loyal to those who've earned it, and you care about your kingdom enough to risk everything, including your pride, to save it. Frank's hand came up to cup her face, the gesture achingly familiar now. How did I get so lucky that you pushed me out of that chair? Instinct, Gloria whispered. My wolf knew you were worth saving before I did. And now? His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. What does your wolf know now? Gloria's breath caught. They'd danced around this for weeks. The tension building every time Frank looked at her. Every time she found excuses to stay close. The confession he'd made while drugged on pain medicine had hung between them. Unacknowledged but impossible to ignore. My wolf knows, she said slowly, that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. With you. Whatever comes next. Frank's control, already strained, finally broke. He pulled her close and kissed her. Not gentle, not careful, but with weeks of suppressed desire and emotion pouring out all at once. Gloria melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, her wolf singing with joy at finally being close to their alpha. Their alpha. No more pretending otherwise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Frank rested his forehead against hers. I meant what I said before. I'm falling in love with you, Gloria. Hell, I think I've already fallen. You're brave and smart, and you see me, really see me, in a way no one else ever has. But I need you to understand what you're choosing. I'm a king in exile with enemies who want me dead. Loving me means danger, possibly for the rest of your life. Are you sure? Gloria silenced him with another kiss. When she pulled back, her eyes were fierce. I was sure the moment I threw myself in front of that poison dart. I was sure when I hit Stanley Chapman with a rock to buy myself seconds. I was sure every time I chose to stay instead of run. Frank, I love you. Not because you're a king, not because of your crown or your power. I love you because you're you, flawed and fierce, and trying so hard to be worthy of the responsibility you carry. So yes, I'm sure. Stop asking. Frank laughed, the sound transforming his entire face. Yes, my lady. I'll stop asking. Good. Now kiss me again before I lose my nerve. He did. And this time, neither of them held back. Later, as they lay tangled together by the fireplace, Gloria traced the scars on Frank's chest, old wounds from battles she'd never know about. Tell me about your father, she said quietly. What was he like? Frank was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, he was everything a king should be. Strong but fair. Ruthless with enemies but generous with allies. He unified the territories not just through force, but by being someone people wanted to follow. His voice roughened. He died protecting me. Assassin got past the guards. Nothing exotic like poisoned darts, just a knife in the dark. Father threw himself in front of the blade meant for me. Bled out in my arms while telling me I'd be a better king than he ever was. Oh, Frank. Gloria's arms tightened around him. I'm so sorry. I was 19. Too young for the crown, but there was no choice. My uncle tried to claim I was unfit, that he should rule as regent until I matured. When I refused, he plotted to kill me and take the throne outright. I had to execute him, my own family, to stop a civil war. Frank's eyes were distant. That's when they started calling me the Iron Wolf. The king with no mercy, no weakness. I cultivated that reputation because it kept people afraid, kept them from challenging me. But the truth is, I'm terrified most of the time. Terrified I'll fail like my father did. Terrified I'll trust the wrong person and end up with a knife in my back. You won't, Gloria said fiercely, because you have me now. And my wolf will scream warning every time someone's wearing a false face. We're a team, Frank. King and Sentinel. Together, we're stronger than anything they can throw at us. Frank pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. I don't deserve you. Too bad. You're stuck with me anyway. They stayed in the cabin for 6 weeks while winter closed the mountain passes completely. Garrett sent messages via an elaborate relay system. News from the capital filtered through loyal houses to intermediaries to runners who could navigate the treacherous terrain. The news was both encouraging and terrifying. As Gloria had predicted, the conspirators were tearing each other apart. Duke Ravencroft and Minister Brennan had nearly come to blows over who should claim the crown. 3 of the 7 conspirator houses had switched sides after Lady Ashford publicly revealed her husband's treachery and the documents proving the conspiracy. Meanwhile, Duke Harrison had quietly been amassing forces. Over 3,000 troops now pledged to Frank's cause. But the conspirators still controlled the capital and the official seat of power. They'd crowned Minister Brennan as regent while they searched for a suitable permanent king, which everyone knew was just a power play to buy time. We wait until spring, Frank decided after reviewing the latest reports. The passes will open in 6 weeks. By then, Harrison will have 5,000 troops ready and at least 10 noble houses pledged to our side. We march on the capital with overwhelming force. No siege, no negotiation. We end this in one decisive battle. The waiting was the hardest part. Gloria trained every day with Garrett when he visited, learning basic sword work and defensive techniques. Her sentinel abilities grew stronger with practice. She could now sense deception and danger at much greater distances, could read people's intentions with increasing accuracy. But more than that, she and Frank built something real in that isolated cabin. Away from courts and conspirators, they were just 2 people falling deeper in love. Frank taught her to hunt and track. She taught him to cook, badly, but the laughter made up for the burnt food. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, sharing histories and dreams and fears they'd never spoken aloud. When this is over, Frank said one night as they lay watching firelight dance across the ceiling, I want to make you my queen. Gloria's heart stopped. Frank, you can't. I'm Omega-born, no title, no family. The nobles would revolt. Let them try. His voice was steel wrapped in silk. You're a sentinel, one of the rarest gifts our kind possesses. You've saved my life repeatedly. You've proven yourself braver and smarter than most of my council. And I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. That's all the qualification you need. The court will say I seduced you, that I'm exactly the witch they've been calling me. Then I'll make an official decree. Any noble who speaks against my queen answers to me personally. Frank rolled to face her, his expression serious. Gloria, I'm not asking permission. I'm asking you. Will you stand beside me? Not as my attendant or my sentinel, but as my equal. My partner. My queen. Tears blurred Gloria's vision. The kitchen Omega, who'd spent 5 years being invisible, was being asked to become the most visible woman in the kingdom. It was terrifying and impossible, and everything she'd never dared to dream. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you, Frank Campbell. And God's help anyone who tries to stop us. Spring came with a roar of melting snow and rising rivers. The mountain passes opened, and suddenly the world rushed back in. Duke Harrison sent word. The army was ready. 5,000 troops, loyal to their exiled king, waiting for the command to march. Frank and Gloria rode down from the mountains surrounded by guards, heading for Harrison's estate where the army had gathered. The sight that greeted them stole Gloria's breath. Thousands of warriors in formation, banners flying, weapons gleaming in the spring sun. All waiting for their king who'd returned from the dead. Frank rode to the front of the formation and removed his hood. A roar went up from the troops, shock and joy and fierce loyalty all mixed together. Their king lived. The Iron Wolf had returned. My people, Frank's voice rang across the assembled army. I stand before you today not as the king you knew, but as the king you deserve. For months, I've watched from the shadows while traitors wore friendly faces and conspired to steal your loyalty. I've seen good men die protecting a throne that others thought they could simply take. But I'm here now, and I bring you a choice. He gestured to Gloria beside him. This woman saved my life not once, but 3 times. She's braver than most warriors I've known. She's a sentinel, gifted with the ability to sense threats before they strike. And she's going to be your queen. Some will say she's unworthy because of her birth. Those people are invited to challenge me personally and discover exactly how much I care about their opinions. Nervous laughter rippled through the ranks, but Gloria could see respect in the warrior's eyes. Frank's absolute conviction left no room for doubt. Now, Frank continued, we march on the capital. The conspirators think I'm dead. They think they've won. They're about to learn why you should never count the Iron Wolf out of a fight. For the kingdom. For justice. For everyone who's suffered under traitors' rule. The roar that answered him shook the ground. 5,000 voices, unified in purpose, ready to follow their king into battle. They marched for 3 days, covering ground quickly with fresh horses and warrior efficiency. Scouts reported that the capital was unprepared. Minister Brennan had grown confident in his regency, and the conspiracy's forces were scattered across different nobles' estates rather than concentrated for defense. The attack came at dawn on the 4th day. Frank's forces swept through the capital's outer defenses like a tidal wave, overwhelming the minimal guard posts before anyone could raise an alarm. By the time Minister Brennan realized what was happening, Frank's army already controlled the city gates and the main thoroughfares. Gloria stayed close to Frank throughout, her sentinel abilities on high alert. She could feel deception and fear radiating from hiding places. Conspirators trying to flee, noble families trying to decide which side to support. But she also felt something else, hope. The common people were emerging from their homes, watching the Iron Wolf reclaim his throne, and they were cheering. The final confrontation happened in the throne room itself. Minister Brennan had barricaded himself inside with Duke Ravencroft and about 30 guards, a last desperate stand. But Frank's forces breached the doors within minutes, and suddenly the conspirators found themselves surrounded. Brennan stood before the throne, not sitting in it, Gloria noticed. Even in his arrogance, some part of him had known he wasn't worthy. You were supposed to be dead, he said, his voice shaking. I was, Frank replied coldly. Death gave me clarity, showed me exactly who my real enemies were. You served my father loyally for 20 years, Brennan. What made you turn traitor? You did. The minister's composure cracked. You were 19 when you took the crown. A boy playing king, making decisions that should have been left to experienced advisors. I tried to guide you, tried to help, but you were too arrogant to listen. So I found others who agreed that the kingdom needed real leadership. By real leadership, you mean yourself. Frank's voice was dangerously quiet. And you were willing to kill me, hire assassins, betray everything my father built, all because your pride was wounded. I was trying to save the kingdom from your incompetence. No, you were trying to save your own ego. Frank drew his sword. The penalty for treason is death, Brennan. You know this. So does Ravencroft. So do all of you who conspired against your rightful king. Gloria watched as Frank's guards moved forward to arrest the conspirators. Duke Ravencroft made a desperate lunge for a weapon, but Garrett cut him down before he'd taken 3 steps. Brennan collapsed to his knees, begging for mercy that wouldn't come. Frank looked at them all with eyes like amber ice. You'll have a trial. Evidence will be presented. And then you'll hang for what you've done. Take them away. As the guards dragged the conspirators out, Frank finally allowed himself to approach his throne. He stood before it for a long moment, then turned and held out his hand to Gloria. Together, he said simply. She took his hand, and together they ascended the steps. But Frank didn't sit. Instead, he pulled Gloria to stand beside him, both of them facing the assembled court that had gathered to witness the return of their king. Let it be known throughout the kingdom, Frank announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the throne room, that Gloria Strader is hereby named Royal Sentinel and betrothed to your king. In 1 month's time, she will become your queen. Any noble who objects is welcome to present their grievances to me in private. I promise you'll receive my full attention. The threat was clear, and the assembled nobles wisely kept their mouths shut. But Gloria could see acceptance slowly spreading across their faces. The story of how she'd saved Frank's life multiple times had already spread. Add to that her sentinel abilities, rare enough to be legendary, and suddenly her Omega origins seemed less important than what she'd proven herself capable of. Lady Ashford stepped forward and Gloria tensed. But the woman simply curtsied deeply. Your Majesty, I'm honored to welcome Lady Gloria to the court. If she requires any assistance in learning noble protocols, my house stands ready to serve. It was an olive branch, and Gloria recognized it as such. Lady Ashford was a shrewd political operator. She'd publicly denounced her traitor husband, thereby saving her family from punishment. Now she was positioning herself as an ally to the future queen. Useful, even if Gloria didn't entirely trust her motivations. Thank you, Lady Ashford, Gloria said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I appreciate your offer and will certainly call upon your wisdom. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Trials were held, quick but fair, with evidence presented to the entire court. Lord Ashford was executed for treason, as were Minister Brennan, Duke Ravencroft, and 4 other conspirators. 3 noble houses lost their titles and lands. Justice was served, though Gloria found no joy in watching men hang, even men who'd tried to kill them both. Meanwhile, preparations began for the royal wedding. Gloria was fitted for gowns she never imagined wearing, taught dances she'd never thought she'd need to know, and briefed on political alliances that made her head spin. Through it all, Frank remained at her side, patient and supportive, running his kingdom with one hand while holding hers with the other. Lady Ashford proved surprisingly helpful, teaching Gloria how to navigate court politics without getting destroyed. The nobles will test you, she warned. They'll watch for any sign of weakness, any hint that you're not worthy of the crown. But you have advantages they can't match. You saved the king's life. You're a sentinel. And most importantly, he loves you. That kind of devotion from the Iron Wolf? Half the court is already terrified of crossing you. The wedding took place 1 month after Frank reclaimed his throne, in the great hall where this entire journey had begun. Gloria stood in the same spot where she'd once served wine and bread, but now she wore a gown of silver silk with a crown of winter roses in her hair. Frank waited for her at the altar in full ceremonial armor, looking every inch the powerful Alpha King. But when his eyes found hers, she saw the man beneath the crown, the one who'd confessed his love while drugged on medicine, who'd taught her to hunt in a mountain cabin, who'd chosen her over everything. The ceremony was traditional, blood oaths and binding promises spoken before the entire kingdom. But when Frank slipped the queen's ring onto her finger, Gloria felt the weight of what they were creating. Not just a political alliance, not just a convenient match between king and sentinel, but a true partnership forged in fire and blood and impossible circumstances. I love you, Frank whispered as they sealed their vows with a kiss. My queen, my sentinel, my Gloria. I love you too, she whispered back. My king, my Alpha, my Frank. The celebration lasted 3 days. Nobles pledged loyalty. Alliances were solidified. Plans were made for rebuilding everything the conspiracy had damaged. And through it all, Gloria stood beside Frank, no longer invisible, no longer just a kitchen Omega, but a queen in her own right. On the third night, after the last guest had finally left and they were alone in their chambers, Frank pulled Gloria close and just held her. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked quietly. "The simplicity of being invisible? No crown, no responsibility, no eyes watching your every move." Gloria thought about the woman she'd been, afraid, hiding, content to exist in shadows. Then she thought about everything she'd become, brave, capable, powerful in ways she'd never imagined. "No," she said honestly. "I don't miss being invisible. Because being seen by you, being chosen by you, being loved by you, that's worth everything. Even the danger. Even the responsibility. Even the eyes watching." Frank's arms tightened around her. "I still can't believe you pushed me out of that chair. One moment of instinct, and it changed both our lives forever." "Best instinct I ever had." Gloria pulled back to look at him. "Well, that and hitting Stanley Chapman with a rock." Frank laughed, the real, unguarded laugh she loved hearing. "My fierce queen. Who would have thought a poisoned dart and a desperate Omega would bring down an entire conspiracy? We make a good team. The best." He kissed her softly. "Whatever comes next, and there will always be something next in this life, we face it together. Deal? Deal." Outside their window, Thornwick Castle settled into peaceful silence. The kingdom was secure. The conspirators were dead or exiled. And in the royal chambers, a kitchen Omega turned queen lay wrapped in the arms of the Alpha King, who'd seen her when everyone else looked away. The assassin had struck in silence, trying to end a reign before it could become legendary. But he'd never counted on Gloria Strader, the shy Omega whose instincts had saved a ruthless king and changed the fate of an entire kingdom. Some stories end with crowns and thrones. This one began there, but it ended with something far more precious. Two people who'd found each other in the chaos, who'd chosen each other against all odds, and who'd built something real from the ashes of conspiracy and betrayal. Love, partnership, hope, and a kingdom that would thrive under their joint rule for decades to come, protected by the Sentinel Queen whose wolf never failed to warn of danger, and the Alpha King who'd learned that true strength meant trusting the woman who'd saved his life with a single desperate push. The game was over. They'd won. And their real story, the one they'd write together as King and Queen, Alpha and Omega, Frank and Gloria, was only just beginning. If Gloria's instincts hadn't screamed warning that night, Frank Campbell would be dead and the kingdom lost to conspirators. But her story, from Invisible Kitchen Omega to Sentinel Queen, proves that sometimes the most unlikely heroes change everything. If you enjoyed watching Gloria save her ruthless Alpha King 3 times, throw rocks at assassins, and claim a crown no one thought she deserved, then subscribe to this channel for more werewolf fantasy stories where underdogs become legends. Hit that like button if you're Team Gloria and Frank, and tell me in the comments, would you have pushed the king out of that chair or played it safe? Also, tap the video on your screen right now to discover another werewolf fantasy where forbidden love and deadly secrets collide in ways you won't see coming.